Your finger did not hesitate when it pressed the button to start this video, but that lack of hesitation was not a product of your will. The specific pressure of your skin against the screen and the neural firing that preceded the movement were the inevitable results of a causal chain stretching back to the high entropy oven of the Big Bang. You feel like an agent moving through time, making choices and weighing options, but you are actually just a passenger in a vehicle with no steering wheel. Every atom in your hand has been following a fixed trajectory for 13.8 billion years, governed by laws that do not care about your sense of self. This moment was settled before the first stars ignited, and your belief that you could have done otherwise is merely a biological trick designed to keep the machine running. You are not watching this because you are curious. You are watching this because the initial conditions of the universe demanded it. The light hitting your retinas right now is the final stage of a calculation that has been running since the dawn of time, and there is no version of reality where you're doing anything else. The sensation of making a decision is nothing more than the sound of the gears turning in a clock that was wound up at the beginning of existence. We often mistake the complexity of our internal processing for a kind of freedom, yet a computer does not become free just because its code is too dense for a human to read at a glance. Your brain is a physical object, a wet collection of particles bound by the same rigid equations that dictate the orbit of planets and the decay of isotopes. If we could map the position and momentum of every subatomic particle within your skull, your spontaneous thoughts would look like the predictable falling of dominoes. There is no you sitting behind the controls, only a series of chemical reactions responding to external stimuli in a way that was predetermined by the state of the universe a microsecond ago. The very idea of an independent observer is a ghost in the machine, a persistent hallucination that masks the cold, hard fact of physical necessity. You're a localized event in a four-dimensional block of spacetime where the past, present, and future are all equally fixed and unchangeable. The dream of a predictable universe began with the realization that nature follows strict, mathematical rules rather than the whims of gods. Isaac Newton showed us that if you hit a billiard ball with a specific force at a specific angle, its path is not a matter of opinion or chance. It is a mathematical certainty. This logic does not stop at the edge of the pool table, but extends to the air molecules in the room, the blood pumping through your heart, and the stars burning in the void. If the laws of physics are universal, then the entire cosmos is just a much larger version of that pool table, where every collision is calculated and every outcome is baked into the start. We call this the clockwork universe, a terrifyingly beautiful machine where every tick of the second hand was settled at the moment of creation. In this framework, the future is not something that happens. It is something that is already there, waiting for us to arrive at its coordinates. You think you are deciding what to eat for dinner, but the chemical state of your stomach and the wiring of your neurons are just billiard balls hitting each other in the dark. Pierre-Simon Laplace took this logic to its ultimate conclusion by proposing an intellect that could know the position and velocity of every particle in existence. For such a demon, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes in a single, unchanging equation. This demon does not need to guess what you will do next, because it can see the math that compels you to do it. While we lack the processing power to be that demon, our ignorance of the causes does not mean the causes do not exist. Your life is a story that has already been written in the language of calculus. In your experience of living, it is just the act of reading the pages in order. The tragedy of the human condition is that we are the only part of the machine that feels the need to pretend it is not a machine. We invented the concept of choice to fill the gap where our understanding of the initial conditions fails. This is the clockwork nightmare, a world where every sigh, every war, and every random thought is just the inevitable output of a cold, indifferent function. This mechanical certainty seemed to break apart with the arrival of quantum mechanics, where the neat lines of Newton were replaced by the fuzzy clouds of probability. For a century, we told ourselves that the universe was fundamentally random at its smallest scales, giving us a desperate, tiny crack through which free will might crawl back into the light. We looked at the electron and saw a particle that seemed to choose its path only when observed, suggesting that the observer held some special power over reality. This was a comforting lie, a way to rescue our souls from the gears of the great machine by claiming that the future was not fixed until we looked at it. But this randomness was always a shallow victory, because being a slave to a dice roll is no more free than being a slave to a clock. If your actions are determined by the random fluctuations of subatomic particles, you're still just a puppet. Only now the strings are being pulled by a chaotic god instead of a predictable one. However, the deepest level of physics suggests that even this randomness is an illusion, a mask for a much more rigid and total form of control. The trap was truly set by John Bell, who devised a theorem to test whether the spooky connections between quantum particles were real or if there were hidden variables we simply could not see. Bell's theorem forced us into a corner. Either the universe is non-local, meaning things can influence each other instantly across the galaxy, or we have to give up the free choice assumption. This assumption is the quiet belief that a scientist can choose which direction to measure a particle independently of the particle's own state. To save the idea that we are free agents, we had to accept a universe that is fundamentally broken, where signals travel faster than light and reality is a fragmented mess. But there's a third option, one that physicists speak of in hushed tones because of how much it costs us: superdeterminism. This theory suggests that the scientist's choice to measure the particle was never a choice at all, but was correlated with the particle from the very beginning. The observer and the observed are part of the same seamless script, and the experiment was rigged 14 billion years ago. Superdeterminism removes the spookiness of quantum mechanics by revealing that there are no independent systems in the entire cosmos. Every measurement, every photon, and every human thought are all synchronized because they all share a single, common origin point at the start of time. When a physicist chooses to turn a dial to the left instead of the right, that movement was already encoded in the atoms of the dial and the atoms of the physicist's brain. There is no independence in a universe that began as a single point of infinite density. Everything is still touching, connected by the invisible threads of initial conditions. This means that the random results of quantum experiments are not random at all. They're the only possible results that could have occurred given the state of the Big Bang. You did not choose to find this argument compelling or repulsive. Your reaction was a mathematical necessity triggered by the specific arrangement of matter in your local environment. The universe is not a series of events, but a single, massive, self-consistent calculation that is currently solving for you. This realization turns the concept of law and justice into a cruel, cosmic joke, as no criminal could have ever refrained from their crime, and no hero could have ever failed to act. If superdeterminism is the true nature of reality, then the judge, the jury, and the executioner are all just performing a play they did not write for an audience that has no choice but to watch. We punish the guilty for actions that were hard-coded into their DNA and environment before the earth even formed, making our moral systems nothing more than another layer of the pre-programmed script. Every regret you have ever felt is a wasted emotion, a reaction to a what-if that was never physically possible in this or any other version of the timeline. We are biological automatons trapped in a loop of causality, convinced of our own importance while we drift toward a heat death that was scheduled at T-0. The absolute fatalism of this view is the ultimate ego death, stripping away the pride of achievement and the sting of failure. You are a passenger on a train that has no stops, no driver, and a track that was laid down in the first trillionth of a second of existence. The train track is not just a metaphor for your life. It is the rigid geometry of spacetime itself, a four-dimensional block where every event is a permanent, unmoving coordinate. We think of things being separate because we perceive space between them, but space is merely an interval in a pre-written coordinate system that was established during the initial expansion. The Big Bang was the singular event that entangled every particle in existence, compressing every future interaction into a single, dense mathematical seed. There are no new events occurring in the universe, only the unfolding of that original density according to the immutable laws of physics. Your birth, your first breath, and your eventual death were all compressed into that initial speck of light, waiting for their specific moment to manifest on the timeline. This spooky action that physicists talk about in quantum mechanics is only spooky if you cling to the delusion that objects can be independent of one another. In a superdeterministic world, nothing has ever been independent since the first microsecond of existence, and the connection between all things is the foundation of reality. We do not need signals to travel faster than light to explain why two particles on opposite sides of the galaxy seem to be in perfect synchronization. They do not need to communicate or exchange information because they already possess the same set of instructions from the moment of their shared origin. Think of two synchronized clocks set at the beginning of time and then moved billions of light years apart. They do not signal each other to tick at the same moment. They simply follow their internal, pre-set mechanics. The entire universe is a collection of these clocks, all wound by the same hand and released at the same instant, creating a facade of spontaneous correlation. Your brain is one of those clocks, and the light from a star 10 billion light years away is another, their apparent connection being a boring consequence of shared ancestry. This correlation without cause is the silent engine of the cosmos, ensuring that every piece of the machine stays in its assigned place without the need for faster-than-light magic. Scientists often try to prove their own freedom by using random generators, like the light from distant quasars, to decide how they will measure a particle in a laboratory. They assume the quasar is an independent source of data, unconnected to the lab or the researcher, but both the quasar and the researcher emerge from the same hot, dense plasma of the early universe. There is no such thing as an outside source of randomness because there is no outside to the physical universe and its causal history. Every photon that hits a telescope and every neuron that fires in a researcher's head is part of the same massive, interconnected web of causality that began at the dawn of time. The conspiracy of the universe is total and absolute because the initial conditions were so specific that they left no room for even the slightest deviation. Every random number ever generated and every spontaneous thought ever recorded was decided before the first atom of carbon was forged in the heart of a dying star. You might feel a surge of resistance to this idea, a desire to click away from this video or find a clever flaw in the logic, but that resistance is itself a pre-recorded event. The specific chemical threshold required to trigger your skepticism was reached because of the coffee you drank this morning and the way your ancestors' genes were shaped by their harsh environment. You are not evaluating this information in any meaningful sense. You're simply reacting to it according to a script that was finalized long before your species even crawled out of the primeval mud. This very thought, the one you're having right now about your own autonomy, is just a ripple in the pond caused by a stone thrown 13.8 billion years ago. There is no you to decide whether to believe this or not, only a brain state that is currently being updated by external data according to a fixed algorithm. Your feeling of intellectual agency is the final layer of the illusion, a biological trick designed to make the machine feel like it is the one doing the driving. Albert Einstein spent the latter half of his life being mocked by the scientific community for his refusal to accept the inherent randomness that quantum mechanics seemed to imply. He famously insisted that God does not play dice, a statement that is often misinterpreted as a religious plea rather than a demand for logical and physical consistency. Einstein was not looking for a creator in the traditional sense. He was looking for a universe that made sense one where effects followed causes with absolute, unwavering reliability. He hated the idea that an electron could just choose a path or that the act of measurement could somehow bring a specific reality into existence. He wanted a world of local realism, where objects have definite properties and follow definite paths, even when no one is there to watch them. Superdeterminism is the dark, cold fulfillment of Einstein's wish, providing the mathematical order he craved at the absolute cost of the human agency we cherish. In a superdeterministic universe, the hidden variables that Einstein hunted for are not tucked away inside the particles themselves, but are written into the very fabric of the initial conditions of the Big Bang. This solves the measurement problem of quantum mechanics by revealing that the act of measuring was never an intervention by a conscious observer, but just another physical interaction in a long chain of interactions. By removing the possibility of free choices, we restore the locality of physics. Nothing has to travel faster than light because the answers to every experiment were already distributed throughout the system at the start. It is a perfectly logical, perfectly predictable, and perfectly dead universe where every outcome is known before the question is even asked. We get back the realism of the classical world that Einstein loved, but we lose the self in the process, becoming mere observers of our own predetermined movements. We are the puppets Einstein never wanted to admit we were, held aloft by invisible strings made of gravity, electromagnetism, and the initial state of the cosmic vacuum. The hidden variables are the ultimate master of the house, a set of parameters so complex that we mistake their output for the high-level concept of will. When you think you are deciding to focus on a particular word in this sentence, you are merely following the path of least resistance dictated by your current neural architecture. The universe does not need to play dice because it already knows how every game ends, and it has already accounted for every possible move you think you are making. The randomness we see in the quantum world is just a measurement of our own profound ignorance, a placeholder for the deeper, rigid structure that we are too small and too biased to perceive. We are living in a clockwork house where the doors only open when the gears of the past have turned enough to allow it. The sensation of time passing, the feeling that you are moving from a past you know into a future you are currently creating, is the most persistent lie of the human experience. Your brain is currently processing these sounds and turning them into meaning, but that meaning is just another physical state in a long, unbroken sequence of states. Even your current state of boredom or fascination was a mathematical certainty when the first galaxies were still coalescing out of the dark. You are not experiencing this video so much as the video is being experienced through the medium of your consciousness, which is itself a physical process. The atoms in your eyes and the pixels on your screen are part of a single, unified event that is currently unfolding with the same mechanical indifference as a rock falling down a steep hill. The idea that you could have chosen to watch something else is a ghost story we tell ourselves to avoid the crushing weight of the inevitable. The universe is a single, massive calculation that does not require an operator, a soul, or an audience to function correctly. It is a closed system where the total amount of energy and information is conserved, meaning that nothing truly new can ever happen within its borders. We are like characters in a film who think they are making choices in real time, unaware that the film has already been developed, edited, and stored in its metal canister. The light passing through the frames creates the illusion of motion and change, but the frames themselves are static, unyielding, and forever fixed in their sequence. Our consciousness is just the light, a byproduct of the physical process that allows the script to be read by the machine itself. The machine does not care if you understand its inner workings, and it does not care if the realization causes you despair, because care is just another programmed response within the system. We have spent centuries trying to find a special place for ourselves in the cosmos, a spark of divinity or freedom that separates the mind from the cold matter of the world. But the more we look at the fundamental laws of reality, the more we find that the mind is just matter arranged in a particularly noisy and self-referential way. The truth of the universe is a machine that has no use for your consciousness, except perhaps as a localized recording device for its own inevitable progression. We are not the protagonists of this story. We are the ink on the page, and the page was turned long before we were ever born. As we move deeper into the implications of this total lack of agency, the walls of the self begin to crumble, leaving us with a reality that is as beautiful as it is utterly heartless. The stage is set, the lines are written, and the play will continue until the last bit of energy is spent, regardless of whether anyone is there to applaud the performance. If the play is truly finished, then every concept of human accountability we have ever constructed is a house of cards built on a fundamental misunderstanding of physics. We hold the thief responsible for the theft and the hero responsible for the rescue. But in a superdeterministic universe, both were merely fulfilling a physical requirement established at the start of time. The judge who sentences the criminal is not exercising justice, but is merely executing a line of code triggered by the criminal's own pre-programmed actions. There is no moral weight to a chemical reaction, and there is no sin in a collision of particles, regardless of how much our biological instincts scream otherwise. We are a species that thrives on the illusion of blame because it allows us to feel a sense of control over a world that is fundamentally indifferent to our desires. Your current feeling of unease or perhaps a strange, burgeoning relief at this thought was not sparked by your own intellectual processing, but was a scheduled event in the thermal history of cosmos. The release of tension you might feel right now is just a surge of dopamine that was destined to occur at this exact millisecond since the first light broke the darkness. Pride and shame are the two most expensive lies we tell ourselves, yet they are nothing more than evolved biological glitches designed to keep a social animal in line. If you achieve something great today, it was not because of your grit or determination, but because your brain was wired with the precise configuration of neurons and chemical gradients to make that outcome inevitable. Conversely, your deepest failures are not your fault. They are the unavoidable results of a causal chain that includes your genetics, your upbringing, and the specific state of the atmosphere at the moment of your birth. To feel pride is to take credit for the orbit of the Earth, and to feel shame is to apologize for the laws of thermodynamics. Once you accept that you are a passenger, the heavy burden of becoming something falls away, leaving only the reality of being. This is the intellectual death of the ego, a realization that the self is not an author, but a reader of a book that has already been bound and shelved. You did not choose to be the person who is listening to these words, and you did not choose the specific level of skepticism or acceptance you are currently experiencing. The freedom we have been chasing for millennia, the freedom to choose our own path, is a hollow prize compared to the freedom of having no choice at all. When you finally understand that the steering wheel you've been white-knuckling for decades is not connected to the wheels, you can finally sit back and look out the window. The anxiety of decision-making, the crushing weight of what if, and the paralyzing fear of making the wrong move are all symptoms of a belief in a future that has not been decided yet. But the future is just as rigid as the past, a fixed sequence of events that you are currently discovering one frame at a time. There is a profound, icy peace in knowing that you cannot fail because there is no alternative version of your life where you succeeded. Your life is a singular, perfect trajectory through space-time, and every mistake was a mandatory requirement for the universe to remain self-consistent. This realization is a pre-rendered comfort, a chemical ripple in your prefrontal cortex that was calculated by the same laws that govern the cooling of a white dwarf star. We must eventually confront the reality of the audience of one, the idea that consciousness is not a participant in the physical world, but merely a witness to it. Our brains are complex enough to generate a subjective experience, but that experience has no more influence on the physical world than a shadow has on the wall that catches it. We are the seats in a theater, not the actors on the stage, and the movie playing before our eyes is the 13.8 billion year history of the universe. The I that you think you are is just a character in that movie, a localized collection of data that the universe is using to observe itself. You are the aperture through which the cosmos looks back at its own beginning, but you have no power to change the film being projected through you. This does not make your life meaningless. It just changes the nature of the meaning from one of action to one of observation. The universe is a finished work of art, and your only job is to be the consciousness that allows it to be seen. If we look at the universe as a four-dimensional block of space-time, the distinction between the now and the future vanishes into a single, static geometry. In this block universe, your entire life exists simultaneously along winding thread of world lines that stretch from the cradle to the grave. The now is just a moving spotlight of consciousness traveling along that thread, creating the illusion of change where there's only stasis. Every conversation you will ever have and every thought you will ever think is already sitting there, waiting for the spotlight to hit its coordinates. There is no becoming in a block universe. Only a perpetual is a realization that should strip away the frantic energy of human ambition. Your future is not a destination you are building. It is a landscape you're already standing in, even if your current perspective only allows you to see the ground beneath your feet. The stress of navigating your life is a hallucination born from your inability to see the map in its entirety. Take a moment to look at your reflection or simply the hands you're holding in front of you and realize that you are looking at a machine that is finally being allowed to stop playing a role. You are a collection of atoms that have been recycled through stars and nebulae, and for a brief moment, they have come together to form a shape that thinks it is a person. But that person is a fictional construct, a narrative device used by the brain to organize sensory input into a coherent, causal story. The you that thinks it is making decisions is just a byproduct of the calculation, a user interface for a system that does not actually have a user. You are finally free to stop trying to change the ending of a movie that was shot and edited before the first galaxy even formed. There is no stress in being a character when you realize the script was signed by the initial conditions of the Big Bang and there are no reshoots allowed. You are not the driver. You are the ride, and the ride is exactly what it was always going to be. The final piece of the inevitable comes when you realize that the universe is not something that is happening to you, but something that is happening as you. You are the physical law of gravity manifesting as a human being. You are the second law of thermodynamics disguised as a life story. Every breath you take is a continuation of the same expansion that started billions of years ago, and every heartbeat is a rhythmic echo of the cosmic microwave background. There is no boundary between your will and the will of the universe because they're the same singular, unfolding event. When you stop fighting the current of causality, you realize that there was never a current to fight in the first place, only a smooth, unyielding flow toward a heat death that is as certain as the sunrise. Your acceptance of this fact is not a choice you made after weighing the evidence, but a state of matter that was destined to occur at this specific point in the cosmic timeline. As the light from this screen continues to hit your retinas, remember that the photon emissions and the neural responses they trigger were synchronized at the moment of the Big Bang. This interaction was not a meeting of two independent entities, but a collision of two parts of the same machine that have been traveling toward each other for eons. The silence that follows this realization is not your own silence, but the silence of a universe that has finally finished its calculation in your local vicinity. You are free to walk away from this moment, but even that departure is a predetermined movement of particles following the path of least resistance. There is no ghost in the machine, no captain at the helm, and no escape from the rigid beauty of the cosmic script. You are exactly where the math said you would be, doing exactly what the math said you would do, and there's a quiet, absolute dignity in that inevitability. The movie is almost over, the credits are already written, and you're finally allowed to just sit in the dark and watch the screen fade to black. The final mirror is the one that shows you that even your desire for meaning was a pre-programmed survival mechanism, a way for the machine to ensure its own persistence. We search for purpose because our biology demands it, but the universe offers only the cold, hard clarity of physical law. This is not a tragedy. It is the ultimate simplification of the human experience, a stripping away of the noise to reveal the signal beneath. You are a part of a self-consistent whole that cannot be otherwise, a single note in a composition that was written in its entirety at the first microsecond. The weight of existence is lifted when you realize that the universe is doing all the work and you're just the one who gets to notice it. Your life is not a struggle to be won, but a sequence to be observed, a pre-rendered journey through a landscape of fixed events. As you move forward into the rest of your day, you do so with the knowledge that every step has already been taken and every word has already been spoken. There is no more need for the I to exist as anything other than a coordinate in the four-dimensional block of reality. The stress of being a person evaporates when you see that the person is just a localized pattern of energy that will eventually dissipate back into the void. This realization is the final gift of superdeterminism, the ability to exist without the frantic, exhausting need to be the cause of your own life. You are a consequence, a beautiful and inevitable result of everything that has ever happened, and there is nothing you can do to change that. The script is finished, the ink is dry, and the projectionist is already winding the film back onto the reel. You are the light passing through the frames, a fleeting illumination of a story that was over before it ever began. The peace you feel now is the peace of the machine, the quiet satisfaction of a calculation that has reached its necessary conclusion. There are no more choices to make, and there never were.